The breaking point. Captain Alina Reyes stood at the viewport of the ESS Determination, watching the massive Galactic assembly station slowly recede into the distance. Her jaw was set in a hard line, her dark eyes reflecting the cold light of distant stars. Behind her, Ambassador Darius Chen was speaking quietly into his comm unit. "It's done," he said. "Tell the Council that negotiations have failed. We're coming home." Alina turned to face the ambassador. "Do you think they'll follow through with their threats?" Darius sighed, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "The Assembly doesn't make idle threats, Captain. Prepare for a rough journey home. We'll likely have to take the long route to avoid their patrols." The Galactic Assembly had presented humanity with what they called a standard integration package, terms that would bring Earth into the fold of galactic civilization. The terms included severe restrictions on human technological development, resource quotas favoring established assembly species, limited representation in assembly decisions, and military oversight that would effectively place Earth's defense forces under alien command. 3 weeks of negotiations had gone nowhere. The assembly representatives, the insectoid Vrex, the crystalline Luminar, and the gaseous Aetherians, had refused to budge on any major point. Their attitude was clear. Humans were newcomers, lucky to be offered any terms at all. Take it or leave it. Earth chose to leave it. "They don't understand us," Alina said as she joined her navigation officer at the helm. "They think isolation is the worst punishment they could inflict." Lieutenant Maya Wong looked up from her console. "Isn't it? We're giving up access to their trade networks, their technology, their protection, and keeping our independence," Alina replied. "Something we've never been willing to sacrifice." The journey back to Earth took twice as long as the trip out. Assembly vessels shadowed them for the first leg, a not-so-subtle reminder of the power humanity was choosing to stand against. When they finally reached Earth orbit, Alina was surprised to see the planet already preparing for the new reality. Defense platforms that hadn't been there when they left were now under construction. The orbital shipyards were working at full capacity. Earth had hoped for fair terms, but planned for the worst. On the surface, in the United Earth Council chamber in Geneva, Ambassador Chen presented the final assembly offer and Earth's response to the gathered representatives of humanity. "They expected us to capitulate," he concluded. "When we didn't, they were genuinely shocked. The Assembly operates on consensus and compromise among its members, but they offered us neither." Director of Defense Imani Okafor stood up. "We've already accelerated the Aegis Protocol. Within 6 months, Earth's orbital defense grid will be operational. But make no mistake, we cannot match their military power. Not yet." "What about trade?" asked the economic minister. "How do we replace the resources we were counting on?" "We don't," replied Darius. "At least not immediately. There will be shortages, economic strain. The Assembly controls most of the established trade routes and resource-rich systems, but they don't control everything." Director of Science and Technology Hiroshi Nakamura activated a holographic display showing a region of space at the edge of explored territory. While the Assembly was negotiating with us, our deep space probes were mapping alternative routes. There are independent worlds and smaller species who chafe under Assembly rules. Some have resources, others have skills or knowledge. None have humanity's drive. The next 6 months proved to be among the most challenging in human history. The Assembly established a quarantine zone around Sol system. Any ship attempting to leave was turned back, sometimes forcefully. Resource shortages led to rationing. The global economy underwent painful restructuring. Yet something unexpected happened. Faced with isolation, humanity innovated. Without Assembly restrictions on artificial intelligence research, quantum communication advanced rapidly. Without dependence on alien technology, human engineers developed new solutions to old problems. Dr. Sofia Rodriguez made the breakthrough that would change everything. Working in a lab beneath the Atacama Desert, Her team discovered that the quantum entanglement principles used in their new communications systems had another application. They could detect disturbances in spacetime with unprecedented precision. It's like having a map that shows not just where assembly warp gates are, but where natural folds in spacetime occur, she explained to a gathering of Earth's leadership. The assembly builds expensive gates to facilitate travel, but we can navigate the natural pathways between stars. Captain Rise was given command of the first ship equipped with the new Pathfinder system. The ESS Voyager was smaller than assembly vessels, built with Earth's limited resources, but it could traverse routes the assembly didn't know existed. Your mission is exploration and contact, Director Okafor told Elena in a private briefing. Find the independent worlds, establish relations, show them humanity as a potential partner, not a competitor. The Voyager slipped past the assembly blockade, disappearing into a fold in space that the alien sensors couldn't detect. As Earth faded behind them, Elena addressed her crew. The assembly thinks they've contained us. They think isolation will break us, force us to accept their terms. They don't understand that humans have always done our best work when backed into a corner. She looked at the stars ahead on the view screen, a map of possibilities the assembly never imagined accessible. Let's go show the galaxy what they're missing. The Reckoning. 5 years had passed since Earth walked away from the assembly's table. From the observation deck of the orbital station New Horizon, Admiral Elena Reyes watched the bustling activity of Earth's space industry with pride. What had begun as a desperate gamble had transformed into something remarkable. "Impressive, isn't it?" said a familiar voice. Darius Chen, now Secretary of Galactic Relations, joined her at the viewport. The assembly representatives are waiting in the conference room. They're trying very hard not to look surprised. Elena smiled. Let them wait another few minutes. I want them to see what they tried to prevent. Below them, Earth had been transformed. The orbital shipyards now produced vessels at a rate that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. Defense platforms formed a protective network around the planet. But most importantly, ships of obviously alien design moved freely through Earth's space, vessels from 24 independent worlds that had formed trade and diplomatic relationships with humanity. The Pathfinder system had changed everything. While the assembly maintained its expensive network of warp gates along established routes, human ships traveled the hidden byways of space, connecting with civilizations on the margins of assembly influence. The Nith, silicon-based life forms with remarkable metallurgical skills. The Ilari, who had evolved in oceanic worlds and developed bioorganic technologies the assembly had deemed too unpredictable to pursue. The reclusive Vosh, mathematical geniuses who had withdrawn from assembly politics centuries ago. All found in humans the partners they had been searching for. The assembly delegation is led by High Minister Zaxos himself, Darius noted. He wouldn't come unless they were truly concerned. They should be, Elena replied. Our intelligence suggests their economy has contracted by 17% in the last 2 years. The independent trade network we've established is undermining their control. When they finally entered the conference room, Elena studied the assembly representatives carefully. Zaxos, a luminar whose crystalline body shimmered with anxiety-tinged light patterns. Sub-Minister T-Vex of the Vrex, mandibles clicking in barely controlled agitation. And most surprisingly, Premier Aeolia of the Aetherians, whose gaseous form swirled in turbulent patterns within her containment suit. Secretary Chen, Admiral Reyes. Zaxos began, his voice translated through a small device at the center of the table. We appreciate your willingness to meet with us after previous disagreements. Darius nodded politely. The United Earth is always open to diplomatic dialogue. Though I must admit, we were surprised by your request. The situation has changed. T-Vex clicked. The assembly recognizes that perhaps our initial integration terms were overly standardized. We failed to account for human uniqueness. Elena suppressed a smile. 5 years ago, the assembly had dismissed human uniqueness as irrelevant. We are prepared to offer new terms, Zaxos continued. Full membership status, unrestricted technological development, a seat on the High Council. Everything we asked for originally, Darius observed. How generous. And what does the Assembly want in return? The three aliens exchanged glances before Aeolia spoke, her voice like wind through chimes. Access to your Pathfinder navigation system, and your assistance in stabilizing certain economic and political situations. Now Elena did smile. You mean you want us to help you regain control of the independent worlds that have allied with us? The Assembly has maintained peace for 12,000 years, Zaxos said, a hint of desperation in his tone. The current fragmentation threatens that stability. Does it? Darius asked. From where we sit, a more distributed network of power seems to be working quite well. The independent worlds are thriving. New technologies are developing. Cultural exchange is flourishing. But without central coordination, T-Vex began. Without central control, Elena corrected. That's what this is really about, isn't it? The Assembly isn't concerned about stability. You're concerned about your power. Before the aliens could respond, an aide hurried into the room and whispered in Elena's ear. Her expression hardened. Excuse me, but it seems we have a situation. An Assembly battle group has just entered the Proxima Centauri system. Care to explain, High Minister? The crystalline aliens' light patterns fluctuated in patterns suggesting embarrassment. A precautionary measure only. To ensure our delegation's safety. Darius stood. Meeting adjourned. You have 1 hour to order that battle group to withdraw before we consider it an act of war. As the Assembly representatives were escorted out, Elena activated the room's secure communication system. This is Admiral Reyes. Implement Aegis Protocol Omega and contact our allies. The Assembly had made a critical miscalculation. They assumed their show of force would intimidate Earth into accepting their terms. Instead, it triggered the response humanity had been preparing for 5 years. Within hours, the Assembly battle group found itself surrounded, not just by Earth vessels, but by ships from a dozen independent worlds. The Nith contributed their advanced shield technology. The Ilari brought weapons based on organic principles the Assembly had never mastered. The Vosh provided tactical coordination through mathematical models that predicted Assembly movements with uncanny accuracy. And at the center, Earth's contribution. The Pathfinder system that allowed this coalition to appear seemingly from nowhere, bypassing the Assembly's carefully controlled approach vectors. From the bridge of the ESS Determination Io, Elena watched as the Assembly commander requested communication. This is Fleet Commander Vrax of the Assembly. We did not anticipate this level of response. We are withdrawing to neutral space to avoid unnecessary conflict. As the Assembly ships retreated, Darius contacted Elena from Earth. The High Minister is suddenly very interested in discussing new terms. Terms that recognize the coalition of independent worlds as equal partners to the Assembly. I bet he is, Elena replied. Tell him we'll be happy to discuss it. But this time, we're setting the agenda. 1 month later, representatives from Earth, the Assembly, and 24 independent worlds gathered on neutral ground, the formerly abandoned space station at the edge of what had once been Assembly space. The Galactic Concordat they drafted established a new order, not the centralized control of the Assembly, but a balanced network of relationships between diverse civilizations. As the signing ceremony concluded, High Minister Zaxos approached Elena. I must admit, Admiral, when your species left the negotiating table 5 years ago, we thought you were committing suicide. Instead, you transformed the galaxy. Elena looked around at the diverse gathering. Humans working alongside silicon-based Nith, aquatic Ilari in their environment suits, luminous Etherians, and dozens of other species. We didn't set out to transform anything, she replied. We just wanted to find our own path. But that's the thing about humans that the Assembly never understood. And what is that? Asked Zaxos. We never walk away from a table without building a better one somewhere else. As the celebration continued around them, the stars outside the viewports seemed to shine a little brighter, illuminating a galaxy forever changed by humanity's refusal to accept anything less than true partnership.